There comes a moment in life when you look around and realize you're not the same person you used to be, and you can't pretend you are. No big explosion, no warning, just a quiet shift inside you, like the soul changing rooms. Suddenly, the old stories don't fit anymore. The old groups don't feel like home, and the old version of you feels like a stranger wearing your face. Most people think spiritual growth looks beautiful, warm light, calm breath, peaceful smiles. But the truth? It often starts with discomfort, restlessness, a feeling that the life you built is becoming too small for the person you're becoming. Carl Jung once said that evolution begins when we stop running from ourselves. And that's when everything changes. You start noticing signs you can't logically explain, little nudges that make you wonder if life knows you better than you know yourself. You feel a push toward something bigger, and a pull away from everything that no longer honors your heart. Your emotions become louder, but instead of breaking you, they rebuild you. Your intuition becomes sharper, not because you're afraid, but because you're finally awake. And the people who once defined you, they look confused now, because you're no longer available for the version of you they were comfortable with. There's humor in this too. You find yourself canceling plans you actually agreed to because your peace said no, even if your mouth said yes. You start craving quiet like it's oxygen. You choose authenticity over approval, and you realize the person you were becoming was always trying to reach you. Of course, the old self tries to come back, like a bad sequel no one asked for. It whispers, "Go back to being small. It was easier." But you just smile now, because even the fear feels outdated. The closer you get to truth, the more lies fall away. The more you see yourself clearly, the harder it becomes to stay in places where you have to hide. You begin to understand why things had to fall apart, why certain people had to leave, why your heart had to break in order to open. This transformation doesn't ask your permission. It arrives like a storm, and then reveals it came to wash you clean. You're not lost. You're shifting. You're not broken. You're unfolding. You're not alone. You're aligning. If you've been feeling this, if your soul has been rearranging your life without asking first, if you've been pulled into the unknown like something out there knows exactly where you belong, then these signs are not coincidences. They are invitations to discover 5 signs that what you're going through is exactly what you were born for. The first rare sign that someone is evolving spiritually is that synchronicities show up everywhere, like life itself winking at you. Carl Jung described synchronicity explained as meaningful coincidences that come from the unconscious mind. You think of a friend and they call. A specific symbol keeps showing up. You glance at the clock, 11:11 again. Those moments feel playful at first, but soon you sense there's inner transformation happening behind the scenes. And something inside whispers, "This isn't random. This is guidance." Synchronicities are like subtle messengers from the collective unconscious, shaping how self-awareness expands. A song lyric hits you like a personal message. A sentence from a stranger echoes exactly what you needed to hear. And suddenly, symbols and meaning have more power than logic. That's when you realize your human psyche is waking up. The power of the mind begins to reveal things your old self couldn't see. It's almost like your soul starts sending invitations, asking you to follow the clues. Then, something even stranger happens. These signs begin to find you. Not occasionally, but repeatedly. As Jungian psychology teaches, this is the beginning of the individuation process, your personal hero's journey. The world feels aligned with your inner truth, and your intuition becomes louder than fear. It's inner alchemy, consciousness and destiny working together. Synchronicities start guiding you away from what holds you back and straight into the core of who you're meant to become. Some people doubt themselves here. "Maybe I'm imagining things," they say. But in depth psychology, imagination isn't fantasy. It's a portal into the unconscious mind, into parts of you like the repressed self and even the wounded healer archetype. This is how shadow work begins, with curiosity. These signs help you face emotional patterns and the shadow in relationships that once kept you stuck. And gently, healing the inner child starts without you even noticing. A powerful way to deepen this stage is to write these synchronicities down, and especially your dreams. Jung believed dreams are coded messages guiding your evolution. A great place to start is the book Man and His Symbols. Inside, you'll discover how archetypes in everyday life, Jungian dream symbols, and synchronicity are connected to the meaning of life and spiritual growth. And believe me, we'll dive deeper into those teachings later in this video, because once synchronicities pull you forward, the second rare sign begins to reveal itself, a silent shift inside you that changes what you're willing to tolerate. The second rare sign of spiritual evolution is surprisingly quiet, a gentle pull away from what no longer resonates with your soul. No drama, no explosions, just a deep knowing. One day, someone is in a situation they used to enjoy, certain friendships, habits, conversations, and suddenly they feel like a visitor in their own life. It's confusing because nothing bad happened. But the unconscious mind whispers, you've outgrown this version of yourself. In Jungian psychology, this moment marks a separation from the outdated persona, the role someone once played to feel accepted. The more they step into authenticity, the less they can pretend. And pretending starts to feel like self-betrayal. They notice emotional exhaustion around people who drain rather than nourish them, especially those stuck in gossip, jealousy, or shallow competition. Jung would say the shadow in relationships becomes visible. Patterns that used to be tolerated become unbearable. The truth is, the wounded healer inside them refuses to shrink anymore. Emotional awareness rises. Values become sharper. That job they stayed in for safety now feels like a cage. That relationship built on fear now feels too small for the depth of their growing human psyche. They stop forcing what doesn't align, not out of rebellion, but because their soul finally knows its worth. And this pull isn't only social, it's internal. Old coping mechanisms lose their grip. Constant distraction. It doesn't numb anymore. People-pleasing. It tastes like self-abandonment. Jung called this the beginning of individuation, where the inner voice of the self refuses to be silenced. They start prioritizing solitude, not loneliness, because silence has become a teacher. This is inner alchemy at work, the transformation of fear into inner stability. The more they detach from the noise, the more they can hear the meaning of life calling their name. And as they detach from what's fake, everything real gravitates closer. Sometimes, this shift brings grief, not because they want to go back, but because they loved who they once were. They look at old memories and feel gratitude mixed with sadness. They are not angry at their past self. They are simply no longer that self. This is spiritual maturity, embracing change without needing permission. Jung said that suffering becomes growth when the psyche refuses to stay small, and that's exactly what's happening. Light and darkness collide, and only what's true survives. This is also where projection and perception shift. They no longer blame others for discomfort. They see where they contributed and choose differently next time. Practically speaking, they begin to protect their energy. They set boundaries. Yes, even with close people. They change small habits, upgrading the books they read, the red book, shadow integration techniques, how to face your shadow, the content they consume, the environments they spend time in. They may start journaling, meditating, or learning about Jungian dream symbols because there's a new hunger for depth, connection, and purpose. These actions are gentle but revolutionary. And soon, the quiet pull becomes undeniable, guiding them into situations, relationships, and opportunities aligned with spiritual awakening. They don't fully understand where life is leading, but they trust they are being led. And here's the fascinating part. As they step forward, the old self tries to return. It's persistent. It whispers, "It was easier before. Don't change so much." But once the transformation begins, there's simply no going back. The third rare sign of spiritual evolution appears as a paradox. You become more sensitive than ever, while simultaneously becoming unshakable inside. Suddenly, you can feel energy shifts when someone enters the room. You sense tension behind someone's forced smile. You notice the longing hidden inside a casual "I'm fine." Jungian psychology says this means the unconscious mind is stepping into the driver's seat. You're no longer numb. You're awake. And while once you might have drowned in overwhelming feelings, now you can handle them with a deeper, calmer self-awareness, a quiet inner strength. This heightened emotional radar reveals shadow work in action. You start spotting your own triggers, not to judge yourself, but to heal. That jealousy you once hated, now you ask what the repressed self is trying to say. That sudden sadness, a message from the wounded healer within. And when tears come, you don't panic. You allow them, knowing you're healing the inner child who finally feels safe enough to speak. This is emotional alchemy, turning what once felt like weakness into wisdom. And here's where it gets even more interesting. You start recognizing psychological archetypes in everyday life. Not in a theoretical way, but in the supermarket, at work, at Sunday lunch with family. You see the hero archetype in a friend who keeps rising after every setback. You notice the victim archetype in the coworker who always complains but never makes a single change. You spot the narcissist when someone demands admiration yet offers none. You see the caregiver in the woman who forgets herself trying to save everyone else. These are no longer random behaviors. They are Jungian dream symbols walking in daylight. You also begin to understand the shadow in relationships. Are that friend who jokes about your goals? Shadow of envy. Are the partner who needs control? Shadow of insecurity. Are the colleague who gossips? Shadow of inadequacy needing distraction. And suddenly, the confusion disappears. It's like upgrading from a blurry screen to full clarity. You stop taking things personally, because you finally see the deeper story behind other people's actions. That's emotional maturity, understanding the wounds behind the mask while still protecting your own peace. Practically, this shift changes how you live, in real ways. You start choosing silence over pointless arguments. You leave WhatsApp groups full of drama. You unfollow accounts that trigger comparison. On a Sunday morning, instead of forcing social interactions, you choose a walk in nature, journaling, or reading books like The Undiscovered Self, which explains how the collective unconscious shapes society and how individuation frees you from it. Meditation becomes a way to access the inner voice of the self, and dreams, dreams, become powerful guides. Their symbols start to repeat, as if giving you directions. And of course, we'll explore dream decoding later in this video. Sparkles, just wait. And here's the most empowering twist. The stronger your emotional intelligence becomes, the less dependent you are on external validation. You don't crumble when someone disapproves of you. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Sensitivity has made you resilient, not defensive. It has helped you embrace both light and darkness within, so you no longer fear complexity. But there's something else happening under the surface, something the ego is not happy about. Because when the new self gains strength, the old self, the one shaped by fear, by people-pleasing, by survival, starts knocking again. The fourth rare sign of spiritual growth is a bit like a comedy, if it didn't feel so intense. Just when someone starts evolving, their old self suddenly shows up like, "Hey, I'm back. Miss me?" That familiar voice returns with all the outdated fears and survival patterns that used to control them. It insists that change is dangerous, discomfort is terrible, and growth is overrated. In Jungian psychology, this is the ego trying desperately to preserve the old persona, the identity that kept someone safe by keeping them small. But here's the plot twist. You simply can't fit into places you've already outgrown. It's almost funny how predictable it is. Someone finally sets a boundary, and the old self says, "Wait, we apologize for breathing." Remember, you start following intuition, and the old fear whispers, "Let's overthink every scenario until we are exhausted." You meditate once, and suddenly the old self demands instant enlightenment. Why aren't we levitating yet? Carl Jung would smile here, because he knew transformation isn't a switch, it's a lifelong individuation process. Each step forward makes the shadow louder, not to punish you, but to make sure you truly see what held you back. And that's crucial. The old patterns return so you can finally choose differently. People-pleasing, emotional avoidance, or chasing validation, they knock on the door like old salesmen selling outdated fear. At work, you're invited into the same draining drama. In love, the shadow in relationships tempts you back into the arms of someone who mirrored your wounds, not your worth. It's like the universe checking, "Are you done with this lesson?" The difference now is that you can actually see the trap. You know manipulation when you feel it. You sense psychological projection in love before it consumes you. And that new clarity is the real power. There's a moment where this gets messy. The old identity tries to guilt trip you. You're being selfish now. You've changed. Who do you think you are? Stay where you belong. But emotional awareness has grown too much to fall for that script again. Now you can laugh, kindly, at your past self. You know they were only trying to survive. They were shaped by trauma, by patterns inherited from the collective unconscious, by fears passed down through generations. But survival isn't the goal anymore. Now it's about the meaning of life, about inner transformation, about saying yes to who you're becoming instead of clinging to who you were. Sometimes this shift looks like small rebellions. You unfollow someone who drains you, a tiny act of inner alchemy. You decline an invitation to protect your peace, a heroic move in the hero's journey. You journal after a tough conversation and discover a repressed self finally expressing a need. You pick up man and his symbols or the undiscovered self not because you're lost, but because you're curious what Jung and modern psychology can teach you next. You start listening to the inner voice of the self, and surprisingly, it sounds wiser and calmer than fear ever did. And here's something beautiful. What once would have broken you only bends you now. What once triggered panic now triggers reflection. You don't collapse under judgment or rejection because your foundation isn't outside of you anymore. Light and darkness coexist inside you without a war. And because of that, you start recognizing truth, even when it hurts. You see the pain you avoided, the mistakes you repeated, the lies you told yourself to feel safe. Yes, truth can be uncomfortable, but God, it's liberating. There's one more sign that confirms you've outgrown the old self. You stop trying to convince anyone to understand you. The approval you used to chase now feels irrelevant. The masks you wore now feel suffocating. You refuse to shrink just to stay loved. And that's when the final rare sign begins to surface. Truth itself rises from the unconscious, ready or not. The last sign of spiritual evolution is that truth shows up like an unexpected guest, uninvited, but necessary. Suddenly, illusions you lived under for years begin to crack. You start seeing reality with uncomfortable clarity, the dynamics in relationships, the consequences of old fears, the dreams you abandoned because someone said they were too much. In Jungian psychology, this moment is when the unconscious mind brings the hidden to the surface, not to hurt you, but to free you. Truth may sting, but it always cleans the wound. You begin noticing what actually motivates people, including yourself. Do you say yes out of love or fear? Do you hold on to someone because of connection or attachment? This is shadow work at its peak, shining light on your repressed self and acknowledging where you've betrayed your own heart. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And wow, that darkness has stories to tell. You realize the pain wasn't the enemy, denial was. This phase can be emotional and messy. You may cry, not because you're weak, but because you finally value your truth more than your comfort. You reflect on old memories and think, I deserved better, especially from myself. You feel resentment rise, then dissolve into self-forgiveness. Healing the inner child becomes a sacred responsibility, not a poetic concept. There's humor too. You laugh at that version of yourself who thought red flags were carnival decorations. You smile at how much you insisted you were fine, while your human psyche was begging for help. Truth doesn't only reveal personal patterns, it also exposes the shadow in relationships. You recognize the manipulator behind the charm, the emotional taker behind the sweet gestures, the narcissism and the unconscious behind the false confidence. You look at someone who once intimidated you and think, oh, that's just a wounded person screaming through a mask. That realization doesn't make the situation less painful, but it makes you less powerless. And then, a shift happens. You stop needing everyone to like you. You stop explaining your worth. You stop negotiating your values. Because the moment you fully see truth, you can never unsee it. And you wouldn't want to. That's inner alchemy, pain transforming into wisdom. Practically, this truth creates action. You change routines, set boundaries, and let go of drained connections like a phone battery stuck at 1%. You upgrade the content you consume, podcasts about depth psychology, books like Modern Man in Search of a Soul, journaling to track emotional patterns, learning shadow integration techniques so the past doesn't sabotage the future. You start decoding symbols in dreams, noticing how Jungian dream symbols wake you up with solutions you didn't see while awake. And yes, we are going to explore all of this in more detail later on. It becomes clear, the power of the mind works in layers. Truth shows you where you were asleep. Awareness awakens the inner voice of the self, the one that guides you forward. And spirituality begins to feel less like fantasy and more like strategy from the deepest parts of your soul. Even suffering starts to look different, because now you know Jung on suffering and growth. Pain is not punishment, it's the portal. You accept that not everyone will understand your transformation, and that's okay. You're not evolving to impress anyone. You're evolving because the self refuses to stay buried. Because the hero's journey always requires leaving the village. Because spiritual awakening demands courage. Because truth doesn't just set you free, it sets your future free. And just when you realize how far you've come, a new voice awakens inside you. A voice ready to tell the world, I'm not who I was, and I'm not afraid anymore. If you recognized yourself in these rare signs, then you're already walking a path that many never have the courage to take. Spiritual evolution isn't about perfection, it's about honesty. It's about honoring the parts of you that are rising, even when you don't fully understand the process yet. What you're experiencing is real, and it's meaningful. From now on, you have a choice. Continue negotiating with your old self, or step fully into the person you are becoming. And yes, that takes courage. It also takes patience, with yourself and with the life that's still rearranging to match your growth. The shifts you've noticed aren't random. They are signs of alignment, indicators that your soul has decided it is finally time to move forward. So let me ask you, what is one thing you will no longer tolerate in your life? And just as important, what new standard are you ready to commit to, starting today? Consider writing your answer in the comments below. It's not just engagement, It's accountability. It's the first visible step of a decision you've already made internally. And here's the truth. You don't need anyone's permission to evolve. Not everyone will understand your transformation, and that's perfectly fine. Your journey isn't meant to convince others. It's meant to connect you with your deepest truth, the one that's been waiting for years to be heard. If this video helped you understand what's happening inside of you, if it brought clarity, comfort, or a sense of recognition, then make sure to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on all notifications. Continue learning and growing every single day. This community is here to support your awareness, your healing, and your expansion. You've already started the process. Now let's walk the rest of the path together. Your next chapter is calling, and it's time to answer.